Sorry for the delay. We're just waiting for the people to join us from T. We will be starting in the next 2 minutes. Assalamualaikum, and welcome to the fourth session of Regional Dialogue 2023. This session is going to be on climate change and food security. We have a very interesting and a very accomplished panel with us here today. Our session chair is Ms. Aisha Khan, who is the CEO of the Civil Society Coalition for Climate Change. The topics that will be covered in this session are low agricultural productivity, food security and its impact on the population, solutions for climate hotspots and outmigration, and climate risk reduction. I will be handing the floor over to Ms. Aisha Khan to take the session forward.
Grateful to IRS and Ambassador Nadeem for organizing this session. For me, it's always a pleasure to chair these sessions and be a panelist on these sessions as well. Today, it is an honor for me to chair this session with such a distinguished group of people. In the session today, we're going to be talking about climate change. And as non-traditional threats go, perhaps climate change is one of the subjects that covers almost every sector that creates a security threat to the nation. Because when you look at food, water, energy, disasters, livelihoods, there's nothing that's left out of climate change that does not affect the security of a country. Climate change is not an exact science, and that is why the threats that we face become perhaps more grave because of the unpredictability that is packed into this subject. All the projections that are made are based on climate modeling. And that in turn is based on the current trends of emissions and the future trends of emissions. So we really don't know what kind of threats we're going to face, what will be the intensity of those threats, and how they are going to affect us as a country and a society. For Pakistan, the present socio-economic landscape is very disheartening and the future looks very grim. So I think today in the discussion, we will try and unpack the linkages between climate change and food security and climate change and disasters and the patterns of outmigration that will follow as a result of the climate hotspots that have been already identified and new ones that will be emerging very soon. Pakistan is also a country that is prone to disasters, especially hydrometeorological disasters. So we have to factor in so many things and look at so many aspects to strengthen our adaptive resilience to climate change. To talk on this today, we have four distinguished panelists with us, and I will start with Mr. Arif Gohir. Arif Gohir is an agronomist, agroclimatologist. He's currently working as the principal scientific officer and acting head agriculture, forestry, and land use section at the Global Climate Impact Studies Center. He assesses the impacts of climate variability and change on agricultural systems using crop simulation and water management modeling approaches. Sustainable agricultural development and science policy linkages are his prime areas of interest. He's presently involved in various international, national projects related to climate change and food security. So, Arif, from you, I would like to invite you to make your presentation, but I would like to add a few questions, and if possible, for you to include the responses into your intervention. One of the things that has always intrigued me, we call ourselves an agricultural country, but actually how much land do we actually have that has the full organic spectrum for optimal productivity? The other one is the present availability of food and its affordability for the people. The third question that comes to mind is, what is the compatibility between the agroecological landscape in crop cultivation right now? How much research on fast-growing, heat-resistant and low water intensive seeds have been done so far? And how can we shift to transformative agriculture? And what kind of adaptation do we need to avoid a food crisis? Over to you, Arif.
Wow. Thank you very much, Madam Aisha. And I'm thankful to Institute of Regional Studies for providing me an opportunity to speak on this forum and share my thoughts on the aspects of agriculture and food security in the country. In fact, Madam Aisha, the question you posed, a very pertinent one and most difficult one, some of them to address. As we all know, that climate change is an existential threat and no one can escape from it. Particularly Pakistan, due to its geographic location and poor resource base, is amongst the countries that are most prone to the vagaries of the climate change. And that's why the German Watch Index has listed it as amongst the 3 countries that are most impacted during the last 20 years. Climate variability is a natural phenomena. It's was going on at its own pace, at a very slow pace, but human intervention has put it at a stage where even the existence of human beings is being challenged right now. If we look at the past in the perspective of Pakistan, our temperature rose 0.6 degrees C, which is in consonance with the findings of IPCC of the previous century's temperature increase. If we look at the projections, we see that the rate of change in climate change will be faster than rest of the global average temperatures. That is due to the particular geographical location of the country. Now I come to the aspect of the agriculture, which is at the heart of many fundamental challenges like food security, economic importance, as well as environmental considerations related to the agriculture and food security. It is a complex system where actors from institutions, policy sciences, biosciences, soil's inherent capacities, and many market systems, these all contribute to a system, and any change in climate will impact all components of the system. This is the adversity and challenge for agriculture. If I talk about the agriculture in Pakistan, unfortunately, during the past 5 decades, we didn't come out of the low productivity trap. Despite of abundance use of land resources, abundance use of, I must say, water resources, we ever remained world's most least water efficient country and land use efficient country. This is the challenge for us. We are growing crops that are most water intensive. Fertilizer in Pakistan is overused. Unfortunately, out of the 79 million hectare area of the country, we are stagnant at 22 million hectares. The national averages of crops, when I will say crops, it means the food security determining crops here. I mean wheat, rice, and maize. I will talk about these 3 crops. The productivity is very low as compared to the other countries. And this is a huge challenge. IPCC reports that in the coming decades, the productivity overall in the world will decline to the tune of 25% by the end of this century. Projections carried out by my own center, Global Change Impact Study Center, say that by mid of the century, wheat will be declined to the tune of 13 to 18%, rice 22 to 26%, and maize up to 34%. And if I talk about other crops upon which our economy resides, like cotton, the scenario is even more horrible. I mean, 40 to 48% reduction is expected as per IPCC projections say. If we talk about the adaptation strategies, how to mitigate the impacts of these things. Agronomic strategies can only manage these declining trends of production to a certain extent, say 0.5 degree or 1 degree C. But beyond that, you have to really look at some genetic modifications in crops, heat tolerant varieties, transformations in agriculture. And this is the limit of the adaptation here, I will say. Agriculture is also known as one of the major contributors of greenhouse gases. It has having a massive impact on the climate system too. If I talk about the recent greenhouse gas inventory developed by GCISE, it says that 222 million ton of CO2 equivalent out of 489 million ton CO2 equivalent emissions, I mean 46% emissions are only from agriculture. These are from livestock, these are from paddy cultivation, and these are from agriculture soil due to excessive use of fertilizer. We also need to consider into these things. Despite of all these things, we are a food insecure country. This is the dilemma of today. Our own National Nutrition Survey says that 38% of the population is food insecure. 48% children are malnutrited. They are having the problems of stunting, wasting, iron deficiency. Though agriculture sector has done some advancements in the past in terms of poultry, you can say, in terms of livestock rearing, in terms of strides in agriculture, maize production, but despite of that, we are food insecure country. We have to resort in importing food. Presently, we are living with the 4 million ton wheat deficit. Ma'am has asked about the question about the limits to expansion. And last 4 decades, since last 4 decades, our area is more or less stagnant. 99 from 1998 till 2022, we are with a 22.1 million hectare, and that's the area that is not increasing. Vertical expansion in yields is possible, and to that extent, what we are doing, research institutes are doing there. They have developed some techniques, but they are not practically realized in the farmer fields. We are still flooding water in our fields, despite of knowing that water is limited. We are still cultivating sugarcane, knowing that water is limited. We are cultivating rice. And for the last 4 decades, when I started my career in 1992, in a Gazette's University student, till now, we are still entering into the same debate. That what sort of crop suits us and why we are going for these such crops. This is the dilemma of this country, and a question to you people as well. We are importing pulses, we are importing oilseed crops, which are less water demanding, which are less fertilizer demanding. I mean, it's a, what I can say, policy conundrum, or what we can say. It's, we are totally acting against our national resources. We are talking about the agroecological zones. FAO and PRC developed those zones way back in 1978 or 1980. I still have no problem with zones. But is there any implementation of the zones? Why we are cultivating the rice and sugarcane crops on the sandy soils? Is there any need of rezonation? This is a secondary question. The first question is whether to the zones we will prepare or we are preparing, are we implementing it? This is a implementing question. The world is talking about transformation in agriculture. It is talking about regenerative agriculture. It is talking about new genomics and new things in agriculture, but our practices are still far behind that perceived pathway of agriculture. Our youth no longer wants to indulge in the farming business. Then who will make this country food insecure? The farming community is getting out of that business. International market is on hold. It can't provide you with the wheat, with the food commodities. So this is going to be a situation of collapse for all of us. We need to think how we can do that. Where is science here? Where is science policy nexus here? Where our institutions are where what they are doing right now, despite of having some proven technologies, we are unable to realize it on farmer fields. So these are few of my questions to you people. This is a policy conundrum. This is a challenge for all of us. I have just portrayed before you a picture of what presently agriculture is and how it will be in the coming years, and not far away, just 5 or 10 years. I wanted to talk to you on the aspects of the international aspects on agriculture, on Corinovia joint work on agriculture, and a follow-up decision on Sharm el-Sheikh, but perhaps time limits me, so I will curtail over here, and in the questions I will take those things. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Bharat. That is a very good picture. Security, and when we look at it, in the context of national security, perhaps it's time for policymakers to understand that the shifts that you're talking about in agricultural patterns and cropping zones and ecological distribution needs to now be heeded and paid more attention to. Otherwise, we're headed towards a famine and a crisis. Our next speaker is Florence Roll. Before her appointment as FAO representative in Pakistan, Ms. Hall was the FAO representative in Morocco from 2018 to 21 and in Malawi from 2013 to 2018. She holds a master's in natural resource management and environment policy from Way College in London and graduated as an agricultural engineer from the Institut National Agronomique in Paris. She also holds an equivalent master's on water and forest engineering from the National School of Rural Engineering, Water and Forests in Paris, France. Welcome and delighted to have you with us. I'll invite you to make your intervention, but like the previous speaker, I will just throw in a few questions, and if possible, if you could weave them into your responses. So I think the audience would also like to know, broadly speaking, what is the role of FAO and how do you assess development in the agriculture sector in Pakistan? If you could also share some of the ongoing initiatives that are undertaken by FAO and the anticipated outcomes. And lastly, what do you recommend as priority actions for Pakistan to become food secure?
I'm not sure we will come to the two questions. Let me say first, thank you very much. Yes. So let me, like this, let me thank very much for inviting me. I was here 1 year ago, time flies, 1 year ago, and I'm very happy to be here again with you today. I'll try to do a mix. I had prepared something on food security and climate change, but I'll try to do a mix with your questions. What FAO does, FAO has two heads, if I can say. One is a forum where knowledge, world knowledge is generated, is disseminated, is discussed by policymakers, by member states. That's one part. And the second part that you in Pakistan always see is the FAO representation. So it's the support that FAO provides to Pakistan through project, through policy support, but at Pakistan level. So what I wanted to do is to give you an overview of the other head, the head that you don't see, on a day-to-day basis, which is the knowledge part. I wanted to do that because every year there is a publication that FAO issue. It's not an FAO only, it's WHO, UNICEF, IFAD, FAO, and I'm missing one. So it's, thank you, NWFP, and he knows which one it is. It's the SOFI. We call it SOFI, is the state of food insecurity in the world. So they launched it in July in New York, the 2022, and I would like to give you a few messages. Thanks to you, I read it yesterday night, and I found it extremely interesting. So that's why I thought it's worth sharing. So the first part, that today, since the SDGs, we have two indicators which look at food insecurity, which are a bit different from this food sovereignty that you were mentioning, which is, does the country provide all the food they need? Okay, so the food security, we have two indicators. One is the prevalence of undernutrition, which is calculated quickly in the number of calories that Pakistan has, produce, import, stocks, divided by the population. So basically it says, do we have in Pakistan enough calorie to feed the people? And the second one, which is a very interesting new indicator, it's called the Food Insecurity Experienced Scale, which are 9 questions asked to a population, randomly, and which give an idea of whether household have felt insecure in the year or not, by the number of meals they have eaten, etc. Okay, these two gives different perspective. So if I give you, however, the bad news is that these two are increasing since 2008, 2009. So basically we had the food insecurity level in the world stagnant, and then 17 went up, and 19 big jump, and 20 another jump. Okay, that's the main message. So the fees, we call it fees. What is interesting is we have the severe food insecurity experience scale and moderate or severe. And the severe globally 11%, and the moderate or severe 29, let's say 30%. And the third message is the gap. So if you look at this publication, they're looking at the gap between women food insecurity and men food insecurity. And when you look at Asia, recently that gap increased, which means vulnerable, women, the previous panel was, I think, on women, I just heard a bit. So these vulnerable people are really more vulnerable these days than before. So if you look at that, and if you look at now Pakistan, so Pakistan, we have data before COVID, okay? So if you look at the prevalence of undernourishment, the first one, the calories, the percentage is 17%. If I ask you in the US, how much is that percentage of people under the nutrition program? It used to be called food stamps. Now it's called another. If I ask you how much % of the population is under these big program for nutrition, it's 12%. Okay? Yeah. So Pakistan is 16.9, 17 in 19. If you look at the other indicator, the severe food insecurity was 1.8%. The moderate or severe was 16%. The big issue, so to me, what I'm saying, and I see people saying, she's not right. But my point is that in Pakistan, there is food. The big issue is which food is eaten. Is it nutritious food? Is it a safe food? And and when you look at this stunting rate, which is incredibly high, 40%. You know, before being in Pakistan, I was in Malawi, the poorest country in the world. The food insecurity was 40% and stunting rate as well. Here, we have a food insecurity level relatively low and the stunting rate extremely high. So the issue in Pakistan is not about the calorie available in the country, but much more, do you have nutritious and safe food for all the people? And then you look at if you look at the SOFI publication, there were three which were very interesting, three main drivers of food insecurity. One, yours, climate change. Second, conflict. Third, economic slowdown. And middle income countries, these recent years, because of different factors, have seen a huge economic slowdown. So basically huge impact on the food security. What is interesting in Pakistan is after COVID, I mean, at the beginning of the COVID, I think it was in August 2020, we assessed that food insecurity experience scale again. And it moved from 1.8% to 12% for the severe food insecurity, and from 12 to 40%, which shows the vulnerability of Pakistan to shocks. As soon as there is a shock, these data numbers go extremely high. So that's one of the big issues. So let me look. So I'm still red, I'm still green. So if you look at, so what's next? And I wanted to give you an example. When you look at where the malnutrition levels are the worst, I would have imagined it's where agriculture is not there. Balochistan desert, you know, Tapaka. No, it's in the middle of where the agriculture is beautiful. It's South Punjab, it's Sindh, along the Indus Basin. So the issue of social inequalities comes in. And I was just in a meeting before coming here about this issue of social inequalities, and then these social inequalities in the agricultural sector, and the issue of the structure of agriculture with landlords, with tenants, and the issue of food insecurity with the health of these tenants, you know, is something that Pakistan might need to look into. So the second part of the report is on an assessment of the level of support that the agriculture provides in the world. So it looks at subsidies to producer, subsidies to consumer, incentive to producer to produce, or disincentive, you know, by putting tariff, border tariff, and it looks at general support services. And in the world, every year, in average, there is 600, I think 13 billion of US dollars, which goes to agriculture, okay? And that report is looking at whether this support goes to a healthy diet, which is the point of having a nutritious food. And it shows that, in fact, this level of support does not support a healthy diet, does mostly support cereals, which are energy, calories. And then it looks at different scenarios if governments we're reallocating the same amount of money to healthy diets, and what would be the consequences on consumers, on producers, on even climate change in terms of greenhouse emission of agriculture. Unfortunately, I don't have these results for Pakistan because it's a global study. It looks at low-income countries, middle-income countries, and high-income countries as a general. But a few things are very interesting for middle-income countries when you compare. The first one in this level of support is that the general support to agriculture in middle-income countries is extremely low. It's comparable to the low-income country compared to high-level countries. So, which means research and development, infrastructure, marketing, etc. That's one. And the second one is for lower middle-income country is that most of the support goes to cheap food and not healthy food. So the incentive of the support is to provide cheap food. So I just want to, because I'm red, and also to leave you a bit of interest in reading this publication. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Florence. I think that was a very fascinating talk that you gave. You started out with endorsing the grim scenarios that Arif had painted, but in the end, you've left us with some hope that there is enough food available in Pakistan, and it's only a question of redistributing it nutritionally and to the population in a different way. So there is an option available to us, and I'm sure the audience in the Q&A session will have a lot of questions for both of you. We will now move on to Afia Salam. Hi, Afia. I hope you're well. I wish you could have been here with us in person, but these days, virtually we meet more often than we do in person. Afia is a geologist by education, a journalist by profession, and a civil worker and environmentalist by passion. She's a member of the National Coordinating Body working to assess and assist in the designation and declaration of marine protected areas along Pakistan's coast. She's also the chair of the Board of Trustees of Indus Trust. She's also a member of the Working Group on Climate Security formed by the National Security Division and Strategic Policy Planning. Afia works as a communication consultant and a freelance journalist. So Afia, from you, what I would like to know is, you've been involved with coastal communities. In fact, you've been the voice of coastal communities for as long as I have known you. So what I'd like to know from you is that with your extensive experience in dealing with community and policy makers in the last 20 or 30 years, how much progress do you think that we have made in conservation of biodiversity? And what are some of the major concerns that you have with regard to the impact of climate change on livelihoods of coastal communities? And how important is it for Pakistan to take care of its marine ecology and conserve the health of the delta? So we'll start off with these questions and then add on as we progress into the conversation. Over to you, Afia.
Thank you very much. And just one correction by, academically, geography was my field. Geology was something that interested me very much, but geography was my degree. This is very interesting that you actually narrowed down on the coastal area, because the topic that was assigned to me was out-migration because of, in the context of food security. And there's some points that I would like to make. Some have already been made, because your colleague has just said the things that I wanted to say. But taking it from there has to be an analysis of why is it that when we look at two different things, like the National Nutrition Survey and the Human Development Index, So we see some of the most prosperous districts of Pakistan having the highest number, highest incidence of malnutrition and even stunting. So this has more to do with, the socio-political climate, or the way things are. It's a power structure, because as has been mentioned, there is enough food in Pakistan as far as the calorific, requirement is concerned. But again, cheaper food doesn't necessarily mean that it is the most nutritious, and majority of the people, unfortunately, are getting the cheap food and not a very nutritious food. But also the power structures and the political, social structures of the feudalism show that the prosperity in the districts that we see is actually not equitable. And because obviously not all the people are equally prosperous in in those districts, and there are people who are malnourished despite and here the prosperity I'm talking about is of the agricultural prosperity. So the overlay of these two things brings out some very disturbing things. The other thing that Arif Gohir had mentioned about the land zoning and not adhering to that, if I look at not just the coastal area, but also Karachi, which is part of, the coast area, but not just the delta, but it is next to the delta. We see that the encroachment of the real estate onto our agricultural area is also driving out people from those livelihoods which traditionally fed these areas. So Karachi's hinterland, like Gadap, like Malid, those were the areas from where we sourced our food. That is now a built up area. Even an aerial look, even if you don't have to go take a look at the, satellite photography, you can see a completely different scenario from what we did when I was studying and doing the land use planning surveys over there. So it's all built up. So that is one thing also that leads to out-migration. And loss of livelihood. And loss of livelihood also impacts your food security and health and nutrition. So that is one thing. Now, if we come to the delta, this is a very difficult thing to get a handle on, because here then we also look at climate change impacts, plus the impacts of human intervention, which is leading to the degradation of delta because the freshwater inflows are not there, and that is degrading and leading to sea intrusion, which has degraded the land, which has completely ruined the riverine agriculture in that area, as well as the marine, because inland fisheries are completely different from marine fisheries. So there the livelihood and the nutrition patterns have been impacted in that context also. Now, Sindh has always had migrant, we have these seasonal migrations. People from the arid areas, they move to the what we traditionally call the Baraji areas, which are obviously the irrigated areas, and they go there as labor. And when they come back, they get, they bring back their enough grains for the rest of the year, along with whatever cash they earn. But the impact is changing because many of the people now cannot even go back to the areas that they resided in. Sea intrusion has rendered thousands of acres of land. In fact, it's no longer there. You cannot grow anything over there. So those, and the land is no longer available to go back to. So there are coastal villages which have been displaced, geographically displaced, at least thrice within the past decade and a half, because the sea keeps intruding in and they cannot live there. The subsoil water becomes brackish, so they cannot grow anything over there. So all these things impact the economy, the ecology, the livelihood, the social structures are unraveled. The men have to go out of the villages to further and further away looking for livelihoods. They become daily laborers, they become woodcutters, and they've lost their ability to fish. So that was their traditional livelihood. So it's a complete social unraveling also of that area, which we must take a look at. Now there is research happening. There are projects and in fact, there's a programmatic approach that is being taken to see how best to be able to derive some benefit, focusing on food security by investing in research and experimentation on biosaline. Because now those areas are not, going to grow the way the crops they used to grow earlier. So that is still in an experimental stage, and well, there is potential for it, but again, it takes a complete different approach for those people to be able to shift to a biosaline environment. They were used to growing bananas and red rice, which you find now very rarely. That was a staple diet of people of the Delta, and it's just no longer there found, and it's seen as a rarity or something really exotic, which it isn't. So we have to look at all these issues, holistically, because the social fabric also matters. If the farmers are no longer able to farm, they are also not immediately able to become marine fisher folk. So what is being done and how it impacts the biodiversity? Obviously, when the delta is degrading, the biodiversity also degrades. It takes millennia for the biodiversity to adapt to new conditions. We have lost many species of fish over there. The fish stock has dwindled, as well as the species availability has also changed. So what is being done? Well, like I mentioned, one thing, the experimentation about making those areas useful, let's say, for agriculture, because the people need food. So biosaline is being experimented with. The Marine Fisheries Department is also investing in that. The Forest Department, it doesn't, at a glance, it doesn't seem there's any nexus between the forest and the conversation about food security. But they are securing the environment along the coast, because the coast is the nursery of our marine fisheries, which were also one of the highest export items, for Pakistan. So their importance in the economy, along with ecology, is something very important. And the restoration and conservation of the coastal ecosystem, which largely is connected to the mangrove forest over there, is something very, very important. And there we have really seen, that's a big success story that Pakistan can actually showcase to the world. Because yes, there was massive degradation from what we had inherited when Pakistan was created. But within the space of about, well, I would say from 2008 onwards to now, there has been a 300% increase in the area, geographical area of mangroves. And the increase has meant the return of prosperity to the communities living within the Delta, who have been engaged in this program of increasing the growth of mangroves, because their livelihoods are ensured. The marine environment, the marine species are regenerated. So that is also linked to their prosperity and food security. So that is happening. It's a slow process. Obviously, it's very easy to destroy something, but it's very difficult to sort of restore it. But it is happening. But yes, we do need accelerated, inputs in that. And we need community engagement, because the success has only come about because of the engagement with the community, which has been made a custodian. And they have seen those benefits of restoring the forest, as well as because the restoration of the forest has seen the regeneration of the marine species. So I think if you're only asking about the Delta, this is one thing that I have seen that this has worked. This is something that has worked, and I'm sure similar interventions elsewhere can also work. In the riverine forest, in the riverine restoration of the riverine agriculture. But like I said, it has to be a holistic way, because the benefits need to trickle down to the community level. It can't just be that the owners of that land, the owners on papers, are the ones who should be benefiting, and the stakeholders in the prosperity are not the people who are actually working towards it. So other than the coastal belt, then the inner cities, it is imperative the land zoning is adhered to, or we will not be able to grow our food to match with the growing population. And I mean, that is the elephant in the room. People don't really talk about the population pressure on our resources. But that doesn't mean that, even if we say that this shouldn't be happening, we don't do something to address it. They do need, if they are here on Earth, they need the resources, then they need food. So if we keep building up on the rich agricultural land, then I think we are going to run into a lot more problems. And as Arif has mentioned, it's not just the percentage of the area which is not growing in and keeping pace with the population of Pakistan, but it also the crop kind and the crop cycles are not compatible with the changes we are seeing because of climate change, the seasonal changes. Because the farmers are not being educated and they are not being engaged, that, you need to sort of climate proof your cropping pattern and your sowing pattern and your harvesting pattern and which kind of crop you should adapt to be able to get benefit and sort of, save yourself from the impacts of climate change. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done on different levels. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Afia. I think you've raised a lot of questions that the audience would be interested in making further queries. And it's good to see that, in the midst of all this despair and bad news that seems to be coming from every sector, which paints a very grim future for us, that there is at least one success story about the mangrove plantation. And I think we need to showcase that, and we need to actually replicate that so that we can set a good example somewhere. Our last speaker is Abbas Shah. Abbas Shah is a practice manager, climate change and disaster risk management in South Asian region within the urban resilience and land global practice for the World Bank. He leads a global team working on infrastructure, lending, technical assistance, and advisory services within the World Bank. Abbas works on cities, infrastructure, finance and economies, technology, climate risk, and resilience and public policy. Abbas earlier served as advisor to the World Bank Executive Director for Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Sri Lanka. So Abbas has a lot of experience in the region. Abbas, welcome to the panel discussion. I'm sure you have your topic already assigned to you, but within that, I think it would be interesting if we could hear more from you about the disasters that Pakistan has faced in the light of the recent floods 2022, and what are the anticipated disasters that Pakistan will face as a result of climate change, and how can Pakistan strengthen its adaptive resilience? Also, if you could weave into your answer the role that the bank is playing right now in the rehabilitation of the flood-affected areas, and what can it do to strengthen and promote the economic resilience of the people so that their coping capacities in future to disasters are better than they were in the last flood. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Aisha Sahiba, and I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm delighted to join, and thank you to IRS for the invitation. I think your questions are absolutely on the point, and I'll weave them into my presentation. I do have a few slides, and I'll share my screen. I hope it's visible. Okay, so my comments will very much build on the comments of the previous speakers, Arif Sahab, Florence, and Afia Sahiba. So at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we actually released a new report on Pakistan called the Pakistan Development and Climate Change Report. So this is a part of a new diagnostic that the World Bank is rolling out for all countries that we work in, the country climate and development reports. And the focus is very much on the development side, with climate as sort of a co-benefit from the development. And the purpose of these reports is to chart out development pathways for countries, which minimizes the impacts of climate change, both on the emission side and on the adaptation side. So it's, as previous speakers have said, Pakistan is already being hit hard by climate change. It's highly vulnerable. As you can see from these maps, that the climate extremes will likely become more frequent and intense. the floods that we saw earlier this year, and tragically enough, the water is still there in parts of Sindh. These kind of extreme weather events are going to become more and more frequent. And the empirical evidence also shows us that these kind of extreme weather events disproportionately affect the poor and the vulnerable. And by vulnerable, I mean, for example, female-headed households, the disabled, and so on. The other aspect is heat. Both India and Pakistan were affected by dramatic heat waves earlier this year. And there were parts of the subcontinent which were not fit for human habitation. And again, the research shows that these kind of extreme heat events are going to become more and more frequent. Now, the estimates show that climate environmental risks could push Pakistan's GDP to decline by about 18 to 20% by 2050. Aisha Sahiba, in your opening remarks, you talked about models and the limitations of models, and I completely agree with that, which is that these kind of estimates of GDP actually masks the fact that the poor will actually get hit much harder than these figures show, because the poor typically don't contribute a lot to the GDP, but they are disproportionately affected by these kind of events. Now, the sad part is that Pakistan has not contributed to this problem. Historically, Pakistan has contributed less than 1% of total greenhouse gas emissions between 1990 and 2018. If you look at the trajectory out up to 2050, the GHG emissions are very low. It's about 1/3 of the global average. And the GHG emissions for 1 unit of GDP is actually decreasing, but at a lower rate than the global average, what we call the GDP, the carbon intensity of GDP. And what this report shows is that there are significant co-benefits of decarbonization. So if you clean up, for example, transport or industry or power, that will have significant dramatic impacts on things like air quality, which then has an impact on things like human health and longevity. So essentially what we recommend is these 5 transitions or critical pathways for Pakistan. So one, which previous speakers have spoken at length, is the agricultural food system that needs to be transformed. Urbanization and resilient and livable cities is the second. A just transition into low carbon energy and transport. Strengthening human capital. I think, again, Afia Sahiba and others have spoken about the need to strengthen human capital. And then finally, about institutions and policies, incentives, and finance all need to be aligned to support these 4 transitions. So on agriculture, I don't think I need to say much, because both Arif Sahib and Florence spoke at length about this. But I do want to say that if Pakistan takes the correct pathway in terms of reforming agriculture, in terms of reducing environmentally damaging subsidies, modernizing irrigation and drainage, things like that, ecosystems and landscape restoration, Pakistan has the potential to become a global powerhouse in agriculture. You do have enormous resources like fertile soil, a very, very sophisticated farming ecosystem, and so on. So there is that potential if these steps are taken to bolster the agriculture and food system. I think cities is clearly a big part of the climate agenda. The good news is that much of Pakistan's urbanization is in the future. There was an estimate out of MIT in 2013, but which is still relevant, which estimated that in the developing countries, more urban infrastructure will be built in the next 30 years than was built in the previous 3,000 years. So, we live in a region which is rapidly urbanized. But the question is, how do you get that urbanization right? And again, previous speakers spoke about the need for good planning. And I think urban planning is really one of the big constraints to building resilient, livable cities in the subcontinent. So that's one area that we really need to focus on. And better integration of transport and urban land use is also another clear priority. Then in terms of energy and transport, clearly we need to continue the transition away from fossil fuels. We need to stop subsidizing fossil fuels, which are still the fossil fuel subsidy is quite high. There we need to take steps both on the supply side and on the demand side. And then, we need to decarbonize what we call these hard to abate sectors like cement or steel. So these would be priorities. And then in all of this, we need to ensure that the poor and vulnerable are protected in this process. And then priority number 4 is obviously ensuring justice in these transitions by strengthening human capital. And like stunting was mentioned again by previous speakers, Pakistan has one of the highest rates of stunting in the world. And so these things like, for example, provision of safe drinking water, sanitation, reducing fertility by improving family planning services. And a point that Florence made is about social protection. One of the most cost-effective measures that a government can take is to put in place ex-ante systems of social protection to protect the poor in the event of climate shocks like the one we witnessed earlier this year in Pakistan. And then, finally, we need to design a system whereby the institutions are such that, it's not just the Ministry of Climate Change that's thinking about climate change, but essentially all ministries, agencies are looking at both the opportunities and the risks posed by climate change, and then designing public investment in such a way that unlocks private investment in some of these areas. We need much better metrics of measuring what we are doing. We need climate risk screening. We need tagging, for example, in the budget system to make sure that we know how much we are actually spending on climate change. And then we need an institutional regulatory framework that would attract climate finance and private investments into resilience. And one of your questions was about disasters. So I do want to say that one of the lowest hanging fruit on disasters, one of the best investments that a country can make is on early warning systems and hydrometeorological services. We have estimated that $1 invested in these early warning systems can save up to $4 to $8 later on in avoided losses. And that is actually an area where the World Bank is working very actively with the government of Pakistan to strengthen this aspect of early warning systems. So essentially, what we need to do is we need to continue to socialize these messages. We need to make sure that the ministries, the agencies, all the stakeholders, the private sector, civil society, we engage with them on these recommendations. Then we need to prioritize. Obviously, all of this cannot be done at once. So we need to make sure that we have a clearly sequenced program of reform. And then, our commitment is to support the government of Pakistan in all of these key transitions. And you did ask, about our support on the post-floods. So we have actually, our board in December approved about $1.5 billion of reconstruction finance for Sindh. And the projects are actually all underway. And what we hope to do is to make these projects really state-of-the-art in terms of best practice on reconstruction, so that we can really showcase them as an example to the rest of the world on how good reconstruction, inclusive reconstruction can be done with the support of all levels of government. So that QR code that you see on the screen, if you scan that, you can download the full report. Obviously, I've not done justice to the richness of the report. It's a 81-page document, but I'd be happy to take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abbas. I think the sharing of the CCDR was extremely important because all the preceding topics that we talked about were covered in that, and there's a handful of recommendations in the CCDR. So I highly recommend to policymakers and to IRS to please get a copy and go through that document, because it does make recommendations that will strengthen the overall resilience, infrastructure, and the coping capacity of communities in Pakistan. I think we're very much on a time, and now I'll open the floor for questions. May I just request that you identify yourself and keep your question targeted and brief, and also identify the speaker if you have a speaker in mind that you want to direct your question to. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Hussain. I belong to Gilgit-Baltistan. None of the speakers, I feel that none of the speakers talk about how global warming and climate change impacting the mountain communities, and how we would be resilient, and how can we improve the local communities in terms of resilience and combating this challenge. Because I have noticed in the area that a lot of people are migrating because of the floods and because of water shortage, because the glaciers are melting, and we have a lot of dryouts in the valleys and in streams, and also the overflow of tourists, which has a positive impact on one side on the local economies, but on the other side, it's a lot of damage sides by imbalancing the capacity to manage the overflow of tourists. So my question is how government of Pakistan, or how you as experts guide us to be more resilient in terms of community, or in terms of one person, individuals as well. Thank you.
Arif, would you like to answer that?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sen. In fact, due to shortage of time, I didn't devote much of the time on the climate change scenarios. The scenario studies GCISE worked out says that if under the RCP scenarios, if the global temperature by end of the century is going to be 4.2 degrees C, Pakistan's temperature will be 5.1 degrees C. I mean, almost 1 degree higher than the global average. And if we bifurcate this temperature variation among northern part and southern part of the country, so the northern parts are more prone to higher temperatures. I mean, Gilgit-Baltistan, AJK, I mean, the cooler region of the country will become more hotter in the coming decades. This means that there will be more Gulf events. There will be more rapid melting of the glaciers, and that is evident. Every year you see 1 or 2 Gulf events, and this unique year, I mean, the last year, 2022, we have 7 incidents of Gulf over there. Ministry of Climate Change is working on a project, rather implementing a project on Gulf that is funded by GCF. There are a set of strategies how communities can be prepared to survive under these climate changes. So I can't say that there is any coherent strategy, because some are in climate change studies, some are regular changes which are relatively easy to monitor. But in terms of extreme events, and especially in terms of the Gulf events, there is no such comprehensive studies even in Pakistan, which needs to be strengthened, in fact, by the research institutes. And of course, I agree with you, there must be a comprehensive strategy with the interaction of the research, the action bodies like NDMAs, PDMAs for the response strategy. So such mechanism should exist. And early warning system, as Jasap has already mentioned, this is the need of the time, especially in those areas for the making the communities resilient over there.
Aisha, could I just add one point to this?
Please go ahead.
So I think this is such a great question. I think a lot of people, especially non-specialists, don't realize that the Himalayas are the youngest mountain range in the world. It's a very active and young mountain range. And so we need to be very careful in terms of development in these ranges. And here I'm not talking about Pakistan, I'm really talking about the entire region, which is really facing a problem in terms of unchecked development in the mountain ranges. And you're seeing, the negative consequences of these. In India right now, the news is taken up by an entire town in the Himalayas, which is sinking. In Nepal and other countries, we've seen increased incidence of landslides. So I think this is an area where we really need to take a step back and consider, how best to go about development. I'm not saying that we should not develop, because clearly, there's poverty in these communities. We do need to create jobs, but we do have to be sensitive to the fragility of the ecosystem in these areas, and we need to figure out a better way to do development. That is my thought for all the countries in the region. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aisha, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
So just a quick interjection. The one success story that I cited of the mangroves, as far as climate change and its adaptation is concerned, as Arif has mentioned, the GLOF2 project, I had gone to see the GLOF1, and there, whatever Abbas had mentioned, that we knew we need the early warning systems and the training of communities to heed the warnings that are given. That is in place, and that also is something that needs to be replicated across Pakistan after we do a proper vulnerability mapping, because that's the only thing that is going to help us, not turn these climate events or meteorological events into calamities. So there's a lesson for us over there as well.
Is it on? Thank you, Aisha, and thank you, IRS, for arranging this. This is, in fact, a very pertinent subject that we are dealing with, and it's a subject, unfortunately, which doesn't get much attention, even now. I feel that national security issues are governed mostly by what's happening around more traditional security issues and not the non-traditional ones, which is basically food security and climate change, which I think we should be focusing on. And in fact, Afia has said something which I wanted to elaborate a little bit about and ask the three A panelists, Abbas, Saab, Arif, and Afia, on how well you are all engaging with, because we are an agricultural country, and as you pointed out, Aisha, we are an agricultural country, but we don't seem to be growing much agriculture, or at least we're underproducing in that way. So the main community which is involved is the farming community, the farmers, the local farmers. And I feel that when I was studying this subject, that our engagement with the local farmers on how to produce, when to produce, what to produce, that would offset climate change issues as well as address food security issues. I feel that at a global level, regional level, as well as a national level, our conversations with the farmers is very limited. I may be wrong, I may be outdated, but what Afia said about the mangrove, I think that's where the success came in, because the local communities did get involved. But if you are having food shortages in a place like South Punjab, which is the bread basket supposedly of Pakistan, then something is lacking, something is missing. So I would like the three panelists who have touched this subject to tell me and the rest of the audience how good your conversation or how effective is your conversation with the local farming community, because I think they have to be, their voice has to be heard in this.
So Arif, I'll ask you to respond to that question with regard to the extension services for the farmers.
Let me be very honest in this sense. Almost 82% of the farmers are below the average of 5 acres. I mean, these are smallholder farmers. We often talk in agriculture institutes, success stories of different large farmers that he has done this and he has done this. Even the government institutes do their experimental plots and some sort of studies on the large farmer side, but small farmers, I must say, if not totally, most of the time is neglected. He is not given awareness. Our extension workers don't mostly touch those farmers even. I must regret that we even right now don't have any national adaptation plan. So how we will be guiding to the farming community then? Pilot studies are there, successful case studies are maybe there, but to what extent they are scaled up? We have the traditional systems of growing wheat, rice cropping system, wheat, cotton cropping system, and in some areas, maize, potato cropping system. These are the cropping systems. Our forefathers used to have diversity of crops. Pearl millet was there, sorghum was there. Many crops were seen in that. But during these 3 or 4 decades, just agriculture as a political economy, we have wiped off all these things. Even in some of the cases, FAO chair can also endorse me. In some of the cases, we are losing the genetic material of those varieties we were having in the past some times ago. So these were the component of resilience. And this resilience has been eroded away. Small farmers, if we are to give our nation food security, if we are to propagate agriculture, we should prepare small scheme for the small farmers in the country. There should be a connectivity. If I'm not taking much of the time. Once I was there in China in 2011, and it was around 5 p.m. in China at that time, and I saw a farmer working in the field, and along with him was a suited guy like me, and he was working with him. I asked my interpreter who that man is. He said, this is the agriculture head of this community. He was working with the farmer. How many extension workers and our agriculture officers are in the field with the farming community until and unless it is done. So I am not a pessimistic guy, but there is very little hope in this sense. Land consolidation, I don't know about the legislation works that the country has done and is going to do, how the land fragmentation system will be solved out. But the present reality is that farmer holdings are getting smaller and smaller. Until they are focused, we can't touch the concept food security.
Afia, would you like to add on to that?
Yes, sure. So I think what he has said, of course, is complete, but who is making those interventions? And the problem is that who is looking at educating the farmers about the problems? They are very small farmers, as he said, majority of them. It makes more sense for them to sell their land to any realtor and get more money than working hard in the sun in all seasons and going and drawing from that the benefit, which is much less than what they can derive if they sell their land off. And this is why we are seeing, these housing estates encroaching over the agricultural land. So that's one reason. The other, of course, is the political. And I'm very happy that he mentioned the word political economy. The places, like the areas where sugar is growing, that's all due to political economy, not because that's the area where sugar should be grown. That's where the resources for sugar are there. So we need to address those things. And the other thing is the extension services. How connected are they? This is the key. Extension services are supposed to be the bridge between the researchers and those who are doing, innovation, and then get it to the farmers. And that is where, the capacity, the human resource capacity, their own capacity to act as that bridge needs to be bolstered. Without that, I don't think we are getting away from the crop mixing that we used to earlier hear about. Now we don't see that. And I do know, I don't want to quote him here in case, I'm not using the word exactly as he said, but one of our leading experts in farming has used the word, has called Pakistani farmers as lazy farmers because all they are growing is wheat. And God forbid, if there is one pestilence attack on wheat, can we even imagine the horrific situation that we will land ourselves in? So I think there's a lot more need for an advocacy, and it is happening at a small scale. I will give you the example of one of our colleagues at of a cohort, and he on his own started a digital data, what he calls, where he's calling the farmers from all around the area, his area, and teaching them internet, making available internet for them, and showing them the websites where they can get the latest knowledge about solutions for their own particular area. This can easily be replicated by the leading universities, by the agricultural departments. This is not rocket science. It's a very small intervention, but as Arif mentioned, the younger generation or the second generation of the farmers are not really taking up this profession. So then those who are there, they need to know what how to leapfrog onto the newer technologies. And mechanization is something also which I can't make that connection in this shorter comment, which probably will prove a solution to this population explosion. Most of the people, this is a throwback to the times when people needed a lot more farm hands, and they would have 20 children, 10 children, whatever, just so that there's enough labor. And if we can reduce the pressure of that need for people to get the same benefit out of their farms with lesser number of people. So we don't see the mention of cooperatives, even in the context of this smog and where people blame the farmers for residue burning. These small farmers don't have the capacity to buy those big machines to be able to clear the farm of the residue. So where are the cooperatives? Where such machines
since the question was directed to Mr. Jha, also Abbas, do you have anything to add on to that?
Nothing really. I think both Arif and Afia summed it up well. But I think the bottom line is that agriculture, in the subcontinent, I don't want to single out Pakistan, is on an unsustainable path. I mean, the fact is that, as Arif said, most of the farmers are small and marginal. They cannot make a living wage just out of agriculture. So really the challenge is, how do you move millions of people, hundreds of millions of people out of agriculture? That's number one, create jobs. That's two. But then how do you sort of reform this whole distortions of subsidies that are environmentally damaging? I mean, if you take Punjab, and here I'm talking both sides of the border, Punjab, we are down to fossil water. Fossil water is water that's more than 10,000 years old. So we are drilling so deep that we are literally, on an unsustainable path. So clearly something needs to be done.
Next question, please.
Thank you. I just want to add something. In the previous discussion, it was really very informative, and I actually belong to an agricultural family from interior Punjab, and I have seen cases that excessive urbanization has caused that problem as well, because my father, he hasn't got any helper or a farmer on his land, because apparently he says that nobody is ready to work over there because they have excessive urbanization is there. The people are ready to leave the villages, and they are because they have facilities over there in the city. So that is another thing which we are facing over there, that we don't have any help over there. People are not ready to do the farming, obviously. And and my question to Ms. Florence is that you talked about the food security gap between the male and the female. That is really interesting and a new thing for me at least. So I would like to explain more on it. So why is only South Asia facing this problem, and what is are the remedies we can look for that? Thank you.
That question for you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, it was new for me as well yesterday night. It's not only Asia, but if you look at the data, the gap is increasing more in Asia than in other regions of the world. But I don't have the response why.
Yes, we still have a few minutes, so Ambassador Jamal, go ahead.
My question is to Abbas. On his first slide, he shocked me that Pakistan is going to lose 18 to 20% of its GDP by 2050. While at the same time, he said that the agriculture sector can do a phenomenal work if handled properly. So after going through the shock value, I would like to hear the good news that all is not that bad. The second question, my takeaway from this all is that food is available, but the quality of food that people are consuming is not that good. That's a very fine point, ma'am, brought out by you. What do you recommend? Because there is a malnutrition and I don't see that we will be able to reach the people. Do you recommend that we make sachets of supplements or something which could be given to the kids at the school and those who are outside kid, some out of the box solution? Because I don't see, because the way we eat, people who have money can eat anything they wish to eat. People who don't have money, they have very limited options available to them and no nutrition is available to them. So how to get over that? Your advice, please.
Abbas, if you would like to please go first, and then I'll pass it on to Florence.
So I didn't really mean to shock anyone, but those are the our models that we've calculated in terms of what we expect. And as Aisha said in the beginning, these models have their limitations. So it could actually be quite higher, the shock from climate change. But what I want to emphasize and what I want to leave you with is a positive message and not a negative one, which is that it is not too late. Pakistan can choose a development pathway whereby you can maximize growth, maximize poverty reduction, and at the same time minimize the impacts from climate change. But the window of opportunity is closing very fast. So we do have to, some of the things that I mentioned in terms of urbanization or agriculture reform, that needs to be done. And there is a political economy aspect to it, as many of the speakers mentioned. I mean, the political class have to take some tough decisions and bring the public along with them, because it's not going to be easy. So let me leave it there. Thank you.
And on the nutrition part, the drivers to malnutrition are cross-sectoral. So they are part of agriculture, they are part of health, they are part of what we call WASH, water and sanitation. They are part of feeding practices. And so to change the stunting rate, you need intervention in all these sectors. So it's not because you're going to, supplement to babies, I mean, from the birth to the 5 years old will help, but it will not, in the future, in the long term, it's not the solution. The solution is really multi-sectoral.
Just on a comment on the sachets, there are globally some interventions that the concept is called as biofortification. Even in Pakistan this year, keeping in view the zinc deficiencies, some of the area, I don't know, about 1 million hectare or less, biofortified seed has been distributed to the farmers so that the zinc deficiency can be eliminated. The same practices has been done in many of the Southeast Asian countries on rice, perhaps.
Assalamu alaikum, madam. Thank you so much for giving the chance to ask a question. Taking the privilege of having Dr. Florence, Mr. Abbas Kheja, and Ms. Aisha Khan, obviously. I would like to have a couple of questions, but I realize the severity of time. So first of all, we talked about the mangroves. And talking about the mangroves, I once happened to discuss it with Ms. Afia also. When we are talking about the coastal belt development, we also talk about the island development. And when we talk about the island development, we are looking forward towards the maritime economy, tapping up the blue elements of the blue economy. What is a sustainable way of cutting down or making up space for the island development so we can promote maritime tourism, as Mr. Abbas Kheja just said? that the window is closing down. And as per my study, yes, by 2050, if not 20%, but 10 to 12%, the GDP is going to go in shock. And my other question is to Ms. Florence. Ms. Florence, food definitely is the most important thing. Illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. FAO is doing a lot of work on it. You could just highlight a little aspect, and I thank you for giving me the chance to ask the question in so short period of time. Thank you.
Florence, can we begin with you, and then we'll go to Abbas and Afia.
Ratified that convention. It has. Pakistan has ratified the Convention of Illegal Fishing. Okay, so the big issue is, there are two issues. One is countries to ratify the convention. The second one is when it's ratified to implement it. And I think I remember, I think there is no country in the world who has implemented all the conventions that they have ratified. So then the issue is on the implementation. But, you know, the implementation, it's a big issue in Pakistan for many policies, not only that convention. Then it's advocacy, you know, I would like just take this opportunity to speak about, somebody spoke about cooperative or organizations. And I have a question to you, because it's my first country where I see such a poor cooperative movement. I mean, not in the political sense, in the cooperation sense. You know, I've done several countries, and in all these countries, I've seen farmers' organizations quite strong, and, you know, for purchasing power, information power, political advocacy power. Here in this country, I haven't. And my question is why?
Well, the why part of it, I think, is very difficult to answer. Perhaps, you know, that is the root cause of all the problems, because we do not think of ourselves as a community. So in no sector will you see cooperation. And I think, you know, I mean, going towards wrapping up, I would also like to add that throughout, you know, consistently, I heard a couple of words that were used by all the speakers: integration, holistic approaches, lack of coordination. So that essentially means that everyone, whether it is as individuals or as government departments, works in silos. There's very little coordination between them. And that perhaps is a national failure on our part that needs to be rectified, because unless we don't understand and grasp this concept that we need to work together, and we need to think of ourselves as one community and also as one South Asia, we're not going to be able to move forward or make any progress. But we repeatedly keep using the words whole of society, whole of government, whole of community. But like the policies we make, we end up not implementing. So the words are not translated into action. And that is perhaps a major flaw that we have. Are there any other questions? We have maybe 1 or 2 minutes. IRS has given us 5 extra minutes, but now he's saying no to me. So I think.
Do you want me to answer the one on island development?
I think Afia, very briefly, you and Abbas, for you also, the pending question that was asked, if you can make your brief interventions, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, the briefest intervention I can make on the question of island development is that sometimes development is that you leave things alone. You leave the natural ecosystem alone, and that itself is development, because it will, you know, regenerate the marine life around it. It will regenerate the forest around it. Because we have seen that these or the pretext of such developments as it is. I was complaining about the gray structures increasing in Karachi. There all you see is elite capture, because who will be living on that island? The fishermen will be displaced. They will not be able to go and get their catch from there. They will not be able to live anywhere around it for security of the high society and the tourist resort people who will be living over there. You will be building a lot of infrastructure across that port and a channel, which is a commercially very, very important channel for Pakistan, and it carries sensitive goods like LNG. So, I mean, why would we want to compromise the safety, the security, the existing livelihood of the community, which actually is the custodian and which actually should get the benefit, by saying that we want to develop a tourist resort? Now, you want to build places. Karachi has, I don't have the number right now, but over 2,000 empty plots, large plots where any resort city can be built. The coast is a fragile ecosystem. We cannot have these huge infrastructure projects compromising the ecology of our coast. We've had a long discussion on that, and that is why this whole scheme was, rejected vehemently by the communities and by the. For the first time, in fact, there was a consensus. Not.
I think we have a connectivity.
They've also rejected it, so I don't know why this keeps coming up.
Abbas, your last comment, and then we wrap up.
I don't think I can put it better than Afia, so nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think that with that, we come to the end of this session. I want to thank the audience for their active participation, and I want to thank the panelists for their brilliant intervention. I personally learned a few new things from their conversation, and I hope that it was equally useful and beneficial to you. I think the end conclusion that we reach after 1.5 hours of discussion and question and answers is that although the situation looks grim, there is still potential. There is a possibility of making an improvement. I think all the gaps were identified, and if we take action on those and we move in the right direction, as the CCDR report says, there is potential for Pakistan to emerge out of this terrible situation, and or the word trap that was used by Arif Gohir, and become a middle or upper middle income country. So let's work on that hope, and let's hope that through IRS, we are able to communicate these ideas to policymakers, and there is follow-up action. Till we meet again, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our panelists and our audience for joining us today. There is lunch, which is going to be served upstairs on the first floor. So please join us for that, where we can continue with some discussions. We will reconvene here at 2:30 for the last session.